Welcome to Combat Learning, Science for Incredible Martial Arts Training. I'm your host, Josh Peacock, 5th Dan in Taekwondo and a skill training specialist for martial arts. Before I put you in the episode, remember to sign up for the free Combat Learning newsletter at www.combatlearning.com. You'll get an introduction to motor learning for martial arts PDF, which gets you up to speed on the powerful stuff that we're talking about in the podcast. I'll send you a transfer of learning cheat sheet, which helps you understand if the activities you do in practice are going to show up in competition. Tons of other free coaching resources, and you'll never miss a podcast episode. Head over to combatlearning.com now to sign up free. Finally, if you're excited to jump in, hit the subscribe button on your podcatcher and enjoy the show.
Okay. How did you get into physical therapy? And in general. And then we'll get into the ecological stuff. Yep.
So I started when I went to undergrad, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to follow my dad's footsteps, be a PE teacher. And so I started on physical education track. Then I took an athletic training, like an intro to like taping or something. And so I fell in love with that. I had been an athlete all my life, was an athlete in college. So I played football for the university, and I was like, well, it allows me to be around athletics even more. Really enjoyed athletics. And it's also medical. It's within the medical field, the allied health professionals, athletic trainer. So I just declared a major there. And then about a third of the way or 2/3 of the way through, I had gotten through most of the athletic training program. Right before I took the licensing exam for that, I started to fall in love with the rehab portion. So athletic trainers take, injured athletes from wherever they got injured and return them to sport, right, with the help of a team, doctors, physical therapists, et cetera. So I fell in love with the athletic or the rehab portion. And that's where I found myself wanting to be most of the time. So as much as I liked, on the field management, I liked the rehab portion even more. So it just made sense to me to use athletic training sort of as a segue into PT school. I had several injuries. I had I got in a car accident when I was 16, broke my neck. I had to go through physical therapy for that. That was pretty significant injury. I had a forearm fracture, radial ulnar fracture, both of the bones in the forearm. It was pretty deformed. I had and in college, I had a fibular fracture. So I had, my fair share of receiving physical therapy. I really enjoyed and thought that the physical therapists that saw me really got a lot of fulfillment out of their life. So that's what brought me into the physical therapy world. Then after I graduated, oddly enough, I have a degree in Spanish too. So I was a Spanish interpreter for about 6 months before I graduated, before I got accepted into PT school. And then the rest is history.
Oh, man. Yeah, the background. That makes so much sense. So you received a lot of physical therapy.
You'll see that's a common denominator with a lot of physical therapists. They've either got a family member who have been, or really anybody in the medical profession, they've either had somebody in the medical system that they feel like was either maltreated or not treated as well as they should have been. And so they want to kind of enter in and be that change, or they have some sort of personal experience with injury and enjoyed the process of recovering. And I was the latter. So, but you'll see that a lot in the PT world.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, a mentor of mine is a physical therapist, and he ended up so he was going to be a physician. And then he was he did some athletics in college and found himself in one of their departments at college with an injury and received physical therapy, and he really fell in love with it. So he ended up becoming a physical therapist. Yeah, it's exactly right. I think I mentioned when I was interviewed by you on your podcast that my mom's an occupational therapist. She didn't receive occupational therapy, but my brother did growing up. He needed occupational therapy, and so that stuck with her. And like 20 years later, she ended up going to college for it.
Right
becoming
on.
an occupational therapist way later in life.
Better late than ever. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure, dude. So she's rocking and rolling there, man. But Yeah, dude, that's awesome. So how did you end up in the ecological dynamics? Is that something you found while you were going through school or later on?
Yeah, definitely through school. In athletic training, you very much a lot of explicit instruction, a lot of what I call over cueing, and you'll hear that term a lot.
Hmm.
Just if you look at really anybody who has kind of adopted the ecological approach in healthcare, but you overload. Essentially, you see somebody, they give you your symptoms, you overload them with information, and then you send them on their way. And whenever they're moving, and they remember like 2% of what you say, right? And so
Hmm.
then whenever they're moving, you say, oh, put your foot here, put your hip there. This is what a perfect squat looks like. This is what a perfect lunge looks like. And you notice that it requires a lot of repetition to be able to actually do something, right? You hear Greg talk about this. It requires a high volume and a high frequency of repetition, or not repetition, but uh, a high volume and a high frequency of action to get a skill. And you would see that develop, but you would attribute to the cues that you were giving them, not necessarily the
Hmm.
fact that they were doing it over and over again and learning implicitly. So I started to kind of look more into it whenever I noticed that some of our professors, like in front of the class, were kind of struggling with explaining why people would learn skills based off of implicit, or excuse me, explicit versus implicit instruction. And so I just started kind of diving down the rabbit hole, and I found this article, and it kind of changed the way that I approached everything. I talked about it whenever I interviewed Greg. It was what is repeated in a repetition, and it just talked about how you go down, the further you go down your frame of reference and the level of analysis, the more you realize that we're not really repeating much in a repetition at all. In fact, you're repeating almost nothing. And again, like if you say, yeah, he did a lunge in that room, that's your level of analysis. He, they did that 100 times, right? But the
Hmm.
further you go, the environment, the sweat on your body, your nervous system at the time, all those things, if you take those into consideration, most of the time, or all of the time, it's always a unique repetition. And
Hmm.
so that really stuck with me. And then I started looking at, so something that Greg really helped me understand was that I wasn't looking macro enough. I wasn't looking at human behavior. I was focused on how to instruct my patients better for my clinical practice. So I found the constraints-led approach, started to dive into the book, right? The Renshaw book. Started to dive into it, and I was like, I have been a massive disservice to most of my to most of my patients, and really made a point there to make sure that I used information as my main constraint, and because I think information is our most powerful tool as clinicians. And if I'm teaching someone to move, I made it a point not to use, or try not to use, explicit instruction, although it's very hard to do. And then not be so overwhelmed with form or a technique whenever someone is doing a movement. So that's how I kind of got funneled into the more of an ecological approach. And I really just called it constraints led learning. Like I did not know like that it was kind of a form of the umbrella of ecological dynamics, and then that was or more under the umbrella of the idea of direct perception. Like we're assuming that we perceive the environment, and that behavior arises from that, and it's not just my little world of physical therapy. So that's where I've gotten to so far. But I've been doing constraints-led approach for my treatment sessions, and for my clinical kind of philosophy for really ever since I graduated. So
Yeah.
yeah, but it's hard because you get hit in the face with a lot of clinical educators that are
Hmm.
just kind of like dinosaurs, man. It's kind of like, well, why didn't you cue them this way? It's like, well, they probably won't learn anything that way, right? Or they might learn something, but they won't learn as efficiently, and they won't learn how to adapt to the environment or a similar environment in the future. So, but it's been a journey. And whenever I started jujitsu, right, which was not that long ago, I saw Greg talking about it, and then I'd started the YouTube channel. I was like, let me just throw it out there and see if he wants to talk to it. And he enlightened me big time on that. So that's kind of how it's progressed. So
Excellent. Yeah, so
yeah.
you started early, man. Right when you started practicing, you were
Yeah.
into
And I was very lucky. I mean, it's for me, it's all luck, but like when I read that article, it just hit me right at the exact right time. And I just made it a point to make that how I was going to end up being a clinician or be the clinician that I wanted to be, which was in line with the behavioral science. So that's just, that was it.
Yeah. Well, you're correct. When you say that you use the constraints-led approach, that's correct. Like the practical aspect of applying it, that's all constraints-led approach.
Right.
Ecological
I was not
dynamics is
aware
just
of
the theory.
Yeah, I was not aware of like the underlying theory, like the
Right.
underpinnings of the constraints-led approach. I was just like, I took it at face value because I was super convinced, and it made sense to me, and it seemed like the science had backed it up. And I was just like, I want to be a better clinician, so I'm going to use the constraints-led approach. But I should have educated myself a little bit more, so that whenever people like you or people like Greg ask me, it's like, well, I should probably know that it's downstream of the idea of direct perception in the environment. But no, he helped me massively in that way. So, and so have you.
So something I appreciate that, man. But
Yeah.
it's something really wild that I've noticed with seeing having a little bit of a window in my mom's education as a sort of clinician in occupational therapy. That motor like in kinesiology, like motor learning and motor control theories are sort of not that important. Like you learn about them,
Yeah.
but it's not like, hey, there's some really important ramifications to these different ways of looking at it. It's more like, hey,
Absolutely.
these are different frameworks you can use to kind of problem solve. And I'm like, I don't understand how you can do that. I don't think that's the case.
The issue, I think, is that, which when you're taught in school, that's what you're taught, right? And I do think some of the onus is on the student, because at that level, you're a graduate student and you should be an adult learner, right?
Right.
This is big boy school. So I do think that if you are only exposed to one thing, that you really don't have. If what you hear in class encompasses 90% of what you hear, then there's all the more likely that you're going to take that motor control framework model, whichever one it is, and you're going to apply it to your clinical practice. Not only that, if you have somebody, this is like any other profession, but kind of a qualm I have with my profession is this idea of dogma, right? You've got these different treatment styles, and if you are a student that or of a clinical instructor who is a McKinsey guy, right? So there's a whole McKinsey method to treating low back pain, right? It's not the gold standard, but there's this method. You got Maitland, you got Mulligan, all these. And so if you've got a clinical instructor who is somebody who uses the McKinsey method for low back pain, you're going to use the McKinsey method for low back pain because, one, that's what the clinician knows. And that's what they know how to grade you on. And so then you start to become a little bit more engrossed in the dogma, right? And so that's kind of my qualm, really, with any type of dogma, but specifically within physical therapy. But you're 100% right, man. Where it has gone from and where it currently is now is this idea of the biomedical model, right? So we would treat people based off of what we thought the tissue was doing at the time. And it was pretty much only nociceptive pain, which means that there is a very localized, essentially means there's like a very localized tissue that has been injured. It hurts right here. I hurt my bicep. When I go like this, it hurts. When I stretch it, it hurts. They used to think that the nociceptive pain was pretty much the driver of pain. And now we understand that if we treat, it's called the biopsychosocial model, and there's other models being kind of made up now. But we know that the more we understand our patient and where they come from and how much they actually trust you, bodes more for their outcomes in the future than what type of clinical treatment techniques or how well your biomechanics knowledge is, or how well you understand the anatomy associated or the tissue healing associated with that particular tissue that may be injured. So it is slowly coming around to be more of like fit more. And there are articles about ecological dynamics in physical therapy. They're just not very popular. right? They've been
Yeah.
published in big journals, but nobody reads them, right? So it's coming around. It just takes time,
Barbell Rehab's putting out a lot of good stuff. I tried to get them
Yeah.
on the podcast. They didn't want to come on. So I got you
No,
instead.
why?
I don't know.
Did
They
they
said
just say
it's not in their lane.
what, the ecological approach or just
No.
combat?
The
Oh,
talking to
combat learning.
combat sports. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess. I mean, you could make the argument that, that resistance training is one of the best things combat athletes could do.
Yeah. I would make
And they
that
could feel
argument.
that, right. So but whatever, it's their thing. So
Yeah, no,
that
I
would be
like no
interesting though.
static. I mean, I think it's funny. Like no static between me and them. I like them. I
Oh,
would
right,
actually,
right.
I would still love to do one of their courses. And there's actually one of the guys that works for them is a couple towns over from me. He's about 30 or 35 minutes away from me.
Oh,
So
nice. I would
he's got
definitely go back. They've got some good things to say.
yeah, he's got like a YouTube channel that he's that's starting to gain some traction too. So yeah, I'll have to check him out. I haven't talked to him yet, but that would be cool.
Yeah. But yeah, we're going more broadly speaking. We as a profession, and I think we as a medical community are going more towards, all right, we're not treating the pathology, we're treating the person, and that person has a pathology, right? And with that, you have to develop an understanding of human behavior. And I think that adopting something like the ecological model. If you don't think that behavior arises from the direct perception, that's fine. But you still have to have some sort of camp where you make this assumption that you have to assume one thing or another about human behavior. You can no longer just kind of brush off the fact that movement is not technically, like people would say, yeah, but movement is a behavior, but it's not like, if you were to go and how you treat your mother is a behavior, right? But it's all behavior. It's just movement behavior versus like emotional behavior or social behavior. So we have to have a little bit more of an understanding of that as clinicians, I think. So very long answer to your question, but that's
No, yeah, no, that's a great one. So it helps listeners understand that we're not in silos. It's not like the ecological approach works really well just for, martial arts or soccer or
yeah.
football. It applies to everything. It applies to sports that don't have, two people. It applies to artistic gymnastics. It applies to kata
Birds.
performance, and it applies to therapy,
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It applies to everything.
And there is a lot of research. I think I say recently, it's within the past decade, but in scientific literature, as you know, like the past decade is really recent. So showing that, like I said before, if you understand, if the patient has the perception that you understand who they are, if you develop a rapport and you have demonstrated that you understand their goals to them, that is a better prognostic indicator a year later than what credentials you have or how well you can demonstrate a certain treatment technique. And that is why I think education and information is our most powerful tool as clinicians. And that's kind of how I top down structure my subjective interviews and treatment philosophy and things like that.
Right.
So, yeah.
So you did you get into combat sports later in life, or do you have a background of that when you were younger?
Yeah, so Taekwondo, I think we talked
Oh,
about
that's
this
right.
a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah,
Yeah. So I got into it very early. So Taekwondo for 15 years. It wasn't when I say Taekwondo, what Taekwondo has become was not the Taekwondo that I grew up in. It was very much, we did a lot of sparring, man. Like, we did poomsays, and we did the obviously you go to competitions, you've got like poomsays, you got sparring, and then you've got like the team. What are they? We talked about demo teams, right?
Demo
God,
teams,
I remember the demo teams. Yeah. But well, I mean, most of what we did was sparring, right? And I think that is what kind of sets that Taekwondo apart from the kind of McDojo Taekwondo of today, where it's just, breaking boards and hi-ya, which is like good. It's good exercise for sure. But from a combat perspective, I think it was a little bit better that we sparred a lot. But, I did that, and then I got into high school sports. So I kind of stopped doing it. And then I didn't practice as much. Did some Muay Thai in college, but it was mainly focused on like building my career, learning and things like that.
Yeah.
So I still stayed lifting weights. I never stopped resistance training. And then I got into jujitsu. Let's see, cumulative. So I'm in the National Guard. So I've taken like a months at a time off for different like military endeavors, I guess you could call them mobilizations. But I would say cumulatively, I've probably been doing jujitsu for a little over a year and a half. So I would do like 6 months, and then I would go off for like 4 months, and then I do it for another 2 months, and then I go off for like 3 months. So like and I would progress pretty quickly, right? Because I mean, I had an athletic background, but I could never actually like capitalize. Like, man, this is something that I'm like good at, right? And so now I'm training about 4 days a week and getting a lot better, a lot quicker. So, but that's kind of and I still practice. Like I still do bag work, and I don't spar as much. We do some light sparring, but I don't. When it comes to jujitsu, I go hard in jujitsu. But like stand up sparring, things like that, Muay Thai, I don't. I spar, but not as much, just because I'm focused on my ground game at this point. So that's kind of my background in a nutshell.
Awesome. I think you mentioned that you don't train at a MMA gym that does the ecological approach, right?
No, we don't. So they saw my interview with Greg, and they've started to incorporate it a little bit. Like the other day, we did it. I mean, like I was convinced. I told him about it. I was like, hey, I asked questions for you guys, and you should go watch and see what the answer was. And they have kind of opened their minds a little bit to it. They're doing more constraints. The other day we did something like the other person had to hold. We were working on staying on top, chest to chest contact, and you couldn't grip, right? So you couldn't grab onto somebody. All you could do was like this. So your grips were your constraints, and so you had to like, if somebody was framing, you had to use your body, and you could kind of cup their head with your elbow and stuff, but you couldn't grip or you couldn't lock hands. And it was an awesome constraint. I thought it was really, really powerful class. And that is something that I never would have seen coming in a million years. So we're getting there. But there's still a lot of like, you learn a technique, you do it a couple times, do a technique, do a couple times, then you spar. But I was just surprised that they started to implement some of that stuff, which is neat.
Yeah, that is very neat. So before they started to play around with the constraints-led approach, were there any ways you tried to incorporate CLA into your personal martial arts practice? Like, how did you sort of rig that?
I would meet up guys who were either new or like coach, for example. And I'd say, hey, you mind if I would kind of design a little game based off of what I thought maybe I needed to work on, right? So I didn't have a background in wrestling, so I was like, I need to work on holding people down. I like this is, and so I would like make a little game, and I'm like, hey man, you mind if we play this game? Like it's kind of a game, but it's it's just a little situation, not situational sparring, but I want to be very clear about that. But it was, I would say something like, all right, you have to stay on top. You have to get from one side to the other side. You have to the person on top has to try to get from one side to the other. And the other person has to try to retain their guard or stand up, something like that. And they'd be like, yeah, that sounds like a fun game. So we play it, right? And so I'm not like, hey, do you mind if I try this ecological approach to our jujitsu? I would just kind of like ask them if they wanted to play a little game or whatever. So that's kind of how I started doing it. Obviously, started to get a lot better, a lot quicker when it came to the things that I was practicing. But that's how I started to implement it. And that was based off a recommendation from you and Greg. You both told me kind of like pull somebody aside and see if they want to do something and see how it works. So, and it did. Shocker.
Awesome, dude. I'm glad to hear that. I wrote a post recently for I launched a Substack a few weeks ago. And I wrote a post that basically just had a few of those methods because I've been asked that question a lot. Like,
did you send it to me on Instagram?
I don't go to a. Did I?
Did you send me a photo of it?
Oh, it was one one of the posts. I thought that maybe
Okay,
you'd
I need you to
like.
send it
Yeah.
again because Instagram won't let me like reopen the photo. And I tried to like reopen it, and I'm like, oh, I was like,
I
I'll
think it
give it
was
a
because it
read,
was
and
a
then I tried to
story.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and I tried to reopen it, and I was like, crap, like I don't remember what it said. So I need you to
Yeah.
resend me that so I can
I'll send it to
screenshot it.
you. It was basically, so that particular post, I think that was the newest one. It was just I wrote a post about like what makes the ecological approach ecological, because
Ah,
people throw the name around as if it just means games.
yeah. Oh God. Yeah. No.
And, and it's like, and they say, so it's funny how people create the conflict. They accuse us of using marketing language, and
Yeah.
then they use it like marketing language.
Like marketing language. Yeah.
Like,
Or
no,
they use it as
ecological
a
means something.
yeah.
Like it
Or they
means
use it as a
something.
way to like to as a point of attack,
Yeah.
like in an argument or something.
Yeah.
But no, that yeah, I want to be very clear about that. This is like when I said games, I said it so that they would just kind of understand broadly what I was trying to do for my game, you know.
Hmm.
But I fully understand that like the trace net approach and ecological dynamics in its entirety is not just like playing games. Like
Yeah.
this is like a conceptual framework for like behavior emerging from the environment.
Right.
But
Right. Right.
anyway,
Yeah. And it's expressed in like team sports or dualistic sports, like or dueling rather, like martial arts.
right.
It's most often expressed as a game. Um, but training for Kumse is probably not going to be that game like most of the time.
Yeah.
You can make some games, but they're not going to look like Red Rover. You know what I mean? It's not
Right.
not that kind of game.
Yeah. No, not a chance.
It's going to be a lonely loner type of game, probably in some cases. I mean, I'm sure you can find creative ways to get performers interacting for certain purposes, but it just depends on what you're trying to do. Yeah, it's
Right.
for sure. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. That's cool, man. So as a clinician, so let me separate between grappling and striking. Are there a lot of do these guys end up with different types of injuries a lot in terms of like the most dominant injuries that you see or that you've seen in the literature?
Uh, if you separate striking and grappling, yes, because a lot of them are more just anecdotally as a clinician in the combat athlete
Mhm.
space or combat sports space, a lot of the issues that come with striking, like if they're only striking and they're not like training for an MMA fight or something where they're doing grappling and striking, they're like a lot of Muay Thai guys or a lot of boxing guys, particularly. Boxing is overwhelmingly concussions and neck injuries, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's outside of like the cuts and scrapes and bruises, you're getting a lot of like traumatic injuries. So they get kicked in the leg a lot, and they have the peroneal. I don't know if you've seen like the dead leg, like Conor McGregor had or not the dead leg, but
Mhm.
you're not able to like plant your foot and stabilize because they've kicked the peroneal or the common peroneal nerve or the fibular
Mhm.
nerve. More of those like traumatic, as you would expect from striking. When it comes to jujitsu, it's a lot of like repetitive injuries, right? And I think it's
Yeah.
due to the nature of drilling, and also just an overwhelmingly so much more knee injuries. I mean, like you can look at the literature on this, like it's so the incidence of injury in something like jujitsu, and I actually did a video on this when it when it comes to children and I was like, the combat sports dangerous for children. And if you look at the incidence of injury, it is a little bit higher in the combat sports. But if you take that and you go a level further and you're looking like, okay, what's are you more likely to injure your knee in jujitsu or wrestling or judo than you are with other sports? And the answer is 100% yes. Like knee injuries are just overwhelmingly they're so abundant that I've made several videos on like knee injuries
Mm.
alone. But I see a lot of knee injuries in jujitsu, or excuse me, in grappling, just in general. Uh, So I guess to answer your question, knee injuries and overuse injuries when it comes to grappling, and when it comes to striking injuries, it's going to be concussions and just like kind of traumatic, like bruises, or like if you and nerve related injuries if they're superficial enough to be hurt by a strike like that. So or like fractures, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like, I mean, you get breaks in grappling, but you know, in striking, it's a little more common, at least anecdotally. I don't know about the research on that, but
I don't either. I know that I have seen one or two studies on maybe jujitsu. I think it was jujitsu. It might have been judo. Finger injuries all the time. Like one of the most popular is finger injuries. Probably, but not as. I mean, they're probably more frequent than knee injuries, I would imagine, but not as serious.
Yeah. The reason I didn't bring those up is because they require a lot less rehab most of the time, right? So you're like, if you get a dislocation, I'm setting that bitch back in and like we're taping it up. You're going to get an x-ray to make sure you didn't get a fracture on the end plate and you're just letting it heal. You know, we're doing some rehab, but like with a knee, you gotta do rehab. Like if you have a ligament tear, you know, if you've got something like a meniscus tear, we really need to kind of work around that. With the fingers, I mean, most of the time it's either a dislocation or a tendon injury. So,
yeah, who needs fingers?
Yeah, who needs them?
You got 4 others, but
it's not like it. It's not like it is what differentiates us from other primates or anything.
It's not like it's incredible that you can make your fist and give somebody brain damage.
That you can do this.
And
it's
then,
not like that's amazing, right?
and then turn around and like sew, like thread a needle. You know, it's not like that's incredible. That no other animal can do that. But yeah, you do need your fingers, but it's you can tape them together so you can look like Yoda.
There you go.
I do that. I don't do that too much in no-gi anymore, but occasionally I feel like when I did gi a lot, it just made my knuckles feel, eventually they got to where they felt kind of like loose and they wanted to pop out of place and stuff. And I didn't tape too much because, you know, I was usually getting there from like I was just good getting to jujitsu from work, like, and not trying not to be late, you know what I mean? So, it's like, I don't have time to sit on the sidelines and tape up all my fingers.
Tape everything up properly. Yeah. No, but you're right. Finger injuries are one that I overlooked, but I think that's mainly because I don't rehab them a lot. Well, I spend a lot of time rehabbing knees, hips, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Necks. So.
I've heard there's a lot of people that just specialize in hand therapy.
Occupational therapists.
Okay.
A lot of times. So occupational therapists deal a lot more with the hands because they're dealing a lot more with like object. So I co-treated a lot with the OTs in the hospital, and typically they now you could do hand specialties, and we treat the wrist hand all the time, wrist hand elbow complex. But if it's specifically occupational therapy, they're dealing with doing literal activities in the home, not just necessarily exercises to promote tissue healing and recovery, right? So they focus a lot more on manipulative tasks, reaching, cooking, cleaning, like getting you back to like daily, mainly more for like neurologic, maybe like strokes and things like that. So they have a little bit more of an intimate understanding of the hand, unless you take a lot of continuing education units for it. But I would say OTs or physical therapists that just kind of dedicate their time to it. And so early in my clinical career, I dedicated a lot of my time to concussion and vestibular disease and upper quarter injuries. So I'd say I'd probably treat the wrist, hand, and elbow a little bit better than most clinicians that are my experience level. But most of the time, physical therapists are going to kind of shy away from the hand altogether, just because it's a little bit more intricate. But yeah, you're right. People do specialize in like wrist and hand injuries, things like that.
I have heard that there are some occupational therapists with hand specialties. I think if I recall talking to my mom, it's a really difficult. There is a credential for it, and it's
probably like difficult. A residency. So it's probably like a board, like the national board certification. So physical therapists have it in orthopedics, they have it in neurology, they have it in geriatric. I mean, so you have to go through these residency programs, which are a year or more, and then you have to demonstrate proficiency through a licensing or through a certification exam. And once you're board certified, it goes after your name. So that's probably what she's referring to. It's probably like the equivalent of that in OT.
Yeah, that's intense. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So with knee injuries, I guess you would have to break it down by the type of knee injury, but like how do you typically approach treating those with an angle towards getting somebody back into jujitsu or into grappling?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's probably what you just said. Treating them with the angle of getting back into jujitsu is where I think we as a profession fail a lot of athletes in general, but particularly the combat sports. A lot of clinicians just say, I'll start macro and then go into the knee. So a lot of clinicians will just say, you continually get hurt doing this. Why do you just stop doing it? Why are you doing jujitsu? Why are you doing this? Blah, blah, blah. If a clinician does that to you, anybody listening, if a clinician says that to you, run out of the clinic and go find somebody who actually wants to help you do your thing you want to do. Second, our main focus as clinicians are to mitigate, I think, it's just my opinion, mitigating the loss of skill in the presence of pathology, right? So we have to make sure that we can constrain the environment enough with our information while we're still giving somebody the ability to participate in their sport to their fullest ability. So the way that I do that is I see well, first of all, you take a really good subjective interview, build rapport, establish trust, all that. Second, you do your objective exam, which is you're looking to see you're taking all the information that you got and you're looking to see what structure was injured. So was it an LCL strain, right? Is it an adductor muscle strain? Is it a nerve injury, right? Did you traction the nerve when somebody put you in a knee bar and now your sciatic nerve is on fire, right? So all of those things are going to inform what I tell you as the clinician. So we'll just give an example. Let's say that somebody was putting someone in a triangle and they heard a pop on the outside of their knee, right? When the guy tried to posture up, heard a pop. It's been a couple of days. They come in and they say, hey, my knee was swollen, heard a pop. I tried to put him in a triangle. He postured up and I tried to squeeze too hard and it gave way. We stopped immediately. I haven't done anything in a while. There's some swelling on the outside of my knee. I do the exam. Probably the LCL is still intact, but it hurts whenever I put pressure through the LCL. It's called a varistress test. And they say, I still want to do jujitsu, but I want to heal, but I want to continue to do jujitsu. I don't want to stop doing the things that. So we would spend an inordinate amount of time, more time than most clinicians spend, looking at jujitsu related movements that don't bother them. So let's say a lot of times with the LCL, hand fighting is good, right? So it's really kind of that hip external rotation with a varus force. So like imagine a triangle. The part of the leg on the triangle that's putting the bite on the neck. And then as you wrap around with the other leg, the stress on that knee is essentially a varus force and a little bit of tibial internal rotation. But that puts a lot of stress on the LCL. So if we can avoid positions like that, then you can do all the jiu-jitsu that you want to. You're just going to have to constrain it to the point where you're not doing you're probably not going to play a lot of guard, right? Because if you're going to try and do a cross with the other leg, if somebody's passing your left leg, that's going to put pressure on the LCL. So I would say you're going to work a lot on hand fighting. Here are the specific exercises I want you to do to work on posterior lateral stability of the knee. And while we do that, we're going to gradually reintroduce movements that would, I hate the word like transfer into jiu-jitsu, right? But movements that would put similar stresses, although smaller stresses on the joint, and then gradually work up into like guard retention or eventually doing the triangle. That's how I would approach it. But it really is highly dependent on what the structure is. Like if you heard a pop versus if it's like a sciatic nerve issue, that would be completely different. So that's kind of like my flow of how I would do that.
Real quick, if you want to bring your CLA coaching and ecological dynamics knowledge to the next level, upgrade to the Premium Combat Learning newsletter. It's the best way to support the show, and you'll get access to exclusive articles and recordings on how to practically apply the science of skill acquisition to martial arts training. Right now, I'm taking Rob Gray's How We Learn to Move book and applying it to martial arts practice design chapter by chapter. Other premium articles include how to manipulate constraints to build deep skill, how the fundamentals emerge on their own, and representative learning design for martial arts training. All these and more are available to you when you upgrade to the premium combat learning subscription. It's less than an OpenMat drop-in fee per month. Seriously, in 4 years of publicly promoting and teaching this stuff, this is by far my best work. Simply go to combatlearning.com and press the button at the top right corner, or you can find an upgrade button in recent emails. See you there.
Yeah. So typically, when, in terms of skill acquisition or skill adaptation, when you're trying to learn a martial art like jujitsu or grappling, I don't, for the most part, I wouldn't want learners to be thinking in terms of techniques and specific movements. But when you're a practitioner, whether that's a physical therapist or a coach, being able to identify and analyze movement patterns that reemerge. Of course, they're not the exact same pattern every time, but
Right.
there are aspects of them that are stable because you can identify that a lunge is different from a squat, right? Because
Hopefully.
so we could say invariant features of those movements that
Right. Right.
that uh, that cue you on whether or not you're looking at a lunge or a squat. And so those things can help you understand how an injury might have occurred, right? In terms of overuse or something like that. And so there are uses for understanding uh, more specific movements, like things to avoid.
Like biomechanics. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to know the anatomy and you have to know the biomechanics. That's why whenever we're talking about skill acquisition, it takes a completely different vocabulary or an approach than it does when you're looking at tissue healing. Although I think that we need to make that gray area as big as possible, whenever we're dealing with pathology. And I think that's where we fail as clinicians. We don't know how long it takes for someone to forget a skill or how quickly they lose skill, but we could damn sure do our best to make sure that we're doing everything possible to make sure that they at least maintain the level of skill that they have while keeping the injured area safe from re-injury, and on top of that, give them an exercise program specific to the tissue healing at hand. So that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to, like, we could talk about like the constraints-led approach and letting behavior emerge all day, but at some point, I got to know what you did. Like, I have to to know what structure may have caused this. So it's definitely a balancing act. It's a hard one,
Yeah, for sure.
but it doesn't have to be a hard one. You could just say stop rolling. You're gonna fucking cat. Sorry, I'll get my left. I didn't mean to. I
Yeah,
said
you
the F
can. Yeah.
word. Okay. Like I fucking hate that, dude. Like it's if I hear somebody, I've been treating clinicians directly next to me, just say, yeah, just take like a month off and come back and gradually introduce yourself. And I'm like, there's so much more that you could be doing while your tissues heal or while you do the proper things necessary to heal,
Yeah.
that would make the transition so much easier. But so it doesn't have to be a hard balancing act. You could take the easy route out as a clinician. But that again, that's doing your patient a disservice. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you wanted to, as a jujitsu coach or a grappling coach, if you wanted to accommodate a learner with an injury, it's not to say, I wouldn't it would be unfair to say that like coaches from a traditional approach are not accommodating to students with injury. But I will say that somebody coming from a constraints led approach is much more friendly to individualizing something, right? Because in the traditional
yeah,
approach, like everybody does what's going on in class, and that's what the way it goes. And if you're not going to do it, then you have to advocate for yourself. You got to speak up and let the coach know you're injured. Um, but with the constraints led approach, I feel like it's a lot easier just to talk to the coach and be like, hey, what can I do something different here? It's like I can't these couple movements aggravate this injury. I need to adapt, right? I need
Right.
an adaptation. So I do
Well,
think
that's good.
you're going to be way friendlier to injured athletes if you're doing the
Yeah,
constraints
because
led
you
approach. Yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, well, what I was going to say is sometimes you don't even have to change the game. It just has to be, the task parameters have to be open enough that you don't have to do the one thing. And
Yeah.
so injured students can automatically adapt in a way that doesn't hurt them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And you do ultimately, like, you can make the argument that you're going to build a behavior that's not as efficient as it could be because you're kind of moving around the pain at the time. But then all you have to do is kind of reconstrain the environment to see to like after you're properly healed. All you have to do is reconstrain the environment or constrain it in a different way to see that the more efficient way for something to emerge. But I think that going right, yeah. So going back to what you said about the traditional coaches versus constraint-led approach coaches, I think that's exactly right. And I think the reason for that is because they have a better understanding fundamentally, whether they know it or not, of human behavior. Right? They know if they provide a constraint and they allow participation in the sport in the best way that they can, then that's going to improve their motivation to continue. Right. That was a bit of a point of contention with me and Greg. When, like, how do you improve the motivation of a student? But that I think that's the reason why the constraint-led students or the constraint-led coaches have better outcomes in general when it comes to skill acquisition over a certain period of time, just because they understand the underlying behavior. So, no, that's awesome. I agree.
For sure. Chia Yi Chow. I think he's from Singapore or China, so I don't know how to say his name right. He's the guy that worked in nonlinear pedagogy, which is like basically the same as constraints-led approach. They
Right.
share basically all the same ideas. But in his book, the nonlinear pedagogy for sport acquisition, I think it's called. I have it behind me on the shelf somewhere. But in sport acquisition, basically he dedicates a chapter to the motivational dimension and how nonlinear pedagogy, which is constraints-led approach, is much more conducive to motivation because the student is involved in their own learning process in a meaningful way, and not just with false choices of like, do you want A or B, right? There's an actual direction to the choices you make that impact your learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
That's well
a good
said.
one. I do think there needs to be more among people that use the constraints-led approach. There does need to be more thought put into other ways of fostering like intrinsic motivation. The methodology itself is already
Intrinsically
friendly to
motivating.
that. Like
Right.
it's already friendly to that. But one thing that I think, so coaches are getting from what I'm hearing from people that do it in grappling, coaches are getting good at responding to the mat, what they see. But coaches are still, they're not transitioning to creating independent learners where the coach steps back a little bit and kind of becomes an advisor to the athlete beginning to map their own journey.
Nice.
So like being able
Yeah.
to manipulate their own constraints and come up with their own games to play for skill. They
That's
do
fair.
exist. They're out. I mean, I know that Coach Souders, several of his top athletes are capable of doing that. But even DeAndre said that sometimes he'll be playing one of Greg's games and he'll constrain himself in addition to whatever it is that he's got going on, because he's got his own goals in mind, even when he
Right.
does his coach's games. So yeah, moving from being the master chef on the mat to like actually creating master chefs under you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No, that's probably one of the harder parts, man. Like knowing when and
Yeah.
how much. That's just, I mean, it just comes with time, I would imagine.
Yeah, and there's no hard and fast rule on that. That's I think
Oh, of
that's
course.
a thing that really catches people is that just as you are attuning to your environment when you play games and you're trying to get better at the sport itself, it's the same thing with coaching. Coaching's just a different. It's its own sort of ecology of information. It's you are attuning to your athletes and you are gaining your own sense of when to step in, when to step away, when do you actually need to intercede or what do you need to say? And when do you need to stop saying things?
Right. Yeah.
If
I'm a
you're
firm
aware. I mean,
believer.
if you're thoughtful.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer, like as a physical therapist and as strength and conditioning coach, I'm a firm believer in working yourself out of a job, and that's essentially what you're talking about. You give you constrain the environment to the point where it's hard to kind of pinpoint something, and it almost necessarily needs to come from the person being coached. And so if
Mhm.
I can give you enough guidance to go on your own journey and constrain yourself, I mean, it's not a good business model because you don't come back as many times, but from a patient care perspective. But I really don't care about that. I care about, are you a good learner from a movement perspective, and can you identify when to constrain yourself? And if you can, then I've done my job. So I like the way you put that. Yeah, it's good.
You mentioned efficiency. There's something I've been thinking about a lot, and biomechanics much better than I do. And so jujitsu coaches uniquely are obsessed. I mean, I shouldn't say uniquely because taekwondo and karate people are like this too, but they're a little less. Karate people are a little less educated than jujitsu people are on this, but they're obsessed with the Elio Gracie dogma and all that about the efficiency and energy output and stuff. So like people will say when they're considering or they're critical of the constraints led approach, they'll be like, well, I already know the most efficient path here, right? And let's give them that for a second. In
Okay,
terms of
that's a big
in
give.
terms of in terms of in,
That's all right though. Yeah.
hold on a second. I'm I'm a good debater. Hold on a second. Okay. We're gonna give them this for a second because we're gonna drop a hammer on top of their head. Let's give them that by like in terms of energy output and economy of motion, it is the most efficient. So like a knee cut pass, right? You slice your knee across the hip and pull your leg out, and that's it. You're inside control. That's more efficient than fighting somebody's legs back and forth and then trying to push it out
Yeah,
of the
like a
way and run around like a
Toriando or something
Toriando
like that.
pass, right? Yeah. And obviously you get more efficient at the Toriando, the better at it you get, the stronger you are with your grips and stuff like that. But there usually is, if you're fighting someone of an equal skill level, there's a lot of moving around and contraction and all that kind of stuff to try and find that timing to, smash somebody's legs together and move around and get that versus a knee cut pass, which, hypothetically we're going to say is the way more, um, that's the way more efficient path. But okay, we give that to them. You already know the most efficient path. You teach the knee cut, but the learner never finds the knee cut. Never finds the knee cut because it's not real life. You
Yeah.
have to it's not real life. You have to, it's the funniest thing because they'll say, well, here's the most efficient movement. It's like, okay, one movement. And then in the next breath, they'll say, you have to chain all your passing techniques together. So we have the most efficient movement, but you also have to do all the other not efficient movements
Right.
or least efficient movements.
Yeah.
And you have to fight with this person and expend all this energy to find the knee cut or to find a different pass, the not efficient pass. why does it matter if you know the most efficient way to do it?
Right.
It doesn't sound like it actually, in terms of system behavior, it doesn't sound like it is the most efficient way, since it never happens that way. How can it be the most efficient way if it never finds its way into real life?
Right. Or it'll never happen that way again. So you're right. It was efficient one time, and it was the most efficient one time because that's the only sample size we have right now. And then it's going to be a different, it's going to be a different environment the next time you do it. And then you have to determine, all right, well, if we're talking about efficiency, like, okay, how we define efficiency. Is it who does it the quickest, or is it who does it with the least amount of effort, or is it both? And so once you start to get people to like define their terms, it's like, oh, well, I guess I don't really know if it's because somebody could essentially not even try and just walk around your guard. But is that more efficient than somebody bulldozing you with their knee through it, in the same amount of, so you either have, I don't know. It's whenever you ask people to get really nitty gritty, they'll accuse you of being semantic, right? Oh, that's semantics. But I mean, the weeds.
Always.
Like,
yes.
That's
always.
What do you mean semantics? I mean, like that's what we're talking about. We're talking about what words mean. Like, how do you not get semantic about that? It's like literally what it is.
Yeah.
So
yeah. You're the one that said efficient. I'm trying to figure what it means.
Yeah,
it
what
can
are you
mean
talking
all
about?
kinds of things.
Exactly. So
what do you mean? What are you talking about? Yeah, it's like
I don't think you know what you mean
Yeah.
when you say that. Yeah, exactly. I 100% agree with you there.
Yeah, and it also it doesn't. And I'm not saying like a knee cut pass doesn't happen in real life. It does. But it doesn't just. It's not just the knee pass. Like you have to do all kinds of other things to find that opportunity usually, which are not the most efficient thing you could possibly do.
Yeah, it's an affordance.
Efficiency is right. I told one guy, I was like, the systems trend towards efficiency over time. But when you're talking about like two people fighting, unless there's a massive skill differential, you have to fight this person like 20 times before you start, what I mean? Like, it just doesn't work that way. It's not how behavior works, right? It's like, just because you have the silver bullet technique doesn't mean you're gonna hit it every time. And the other thing is like conditioning, right? Do you really, are we really going to say that Joseph Chin's like spastic, floaty, movement-based, very athletic passing style, we're going to say that he shouldn't do it because it's less efficient than like smash passing or something? Like, come on.
Yeah, it just becomes this like it becomes an equation with infinite amount of variables, right? So Joseph Chin, he's got an amazing like aerobic base, and it's just conditioning is through this roof, right? Or through the roof. So how do we know that if he's kind of doing this like loose, spazzy pass, super athletic pass, and he gets the pass, how do we know he didn't spend less energy relative to his ability than someone else? Right. Yeah. So it has everything to do with capabilities. Yeah. A lot of these things that you can't measure. You'll hear Greg talk about like how do you measure? How do you know with what intensity to go through? It's like you don't. You just use as much effort as you need to complete the task. And I thought that's really good because you can use heart rate, but heart rate's harder to measure whenever you're doing you get sweaty and all that stuff. If you could have a way to measure heart rate, that'd be pretty cool. But even then, even if you're able to just really, let's say you could be as objective as possible about your heart rate, there are so many other things like neural drive and muscle mass and all these things, neural capacity that would play into it. So I think right now, as far as, and I know you would agree, like this idea of efficiency, right, is this kind of the infinitely ambiguous thing that until we have really, really definitive markers to measure, and we've seen it repeated over time, we need to just let the behavior emerge and stop like trying to say one thing is more efficient than the other, or telling people to stop use their strength because they're not being as efficient as they could. All those things. Just I don't know. No, I totally agree.
That's just another can of worms too. Like if you succeed in getting them to actually reproduce something, the movement pattern. If you
Mhm.
get them to reproduce something that looks like the technique, the way they perform the technique is still not going to be that efficient. They have to get better at being able to repeat that,
Right.
collection of alignments that you've forced them to reproduce, and they're not going to be good at it when they first do it.
Yeah.
So it's like,
that's a good way to put it.
it's like, it's the most the most efficient way to do it, but also, even though I succeeded in getting you to do it, you still suck at it. Like, it's like
That was perfect. You still suck.
Yeah, you did it perfect, but it still didn't work because some ineffable quality of, I don't know. Jiu-jitsu people like to think of themselves as like these intellectual combat sports people. They're not like karate people. They're not
Oh,
like
dude.
whatever.
Oh,
And they
man.
basically believe in magic.
You're about to open a can of worms with me.
Like,
this, like, that they were using the word, somebody said something the other day, and they said like metaphysics. And I was like, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. We were talking about like, God, I can't remember. Somebody asked.
Well, people constantly misuse the word metaphysics anyways.
God, I was
They don't
like,
even
dude,
know what it means. Like, people that use the word don't even know what it means.
That's what I'm trying to say. Like, but I think it was somebody, we were just sitting around talking and somebody said something and they were like, I don't know, man, it's just metaphysics. And I was like, wait. I didn't want to be that guy. I was like, are you being serious or is it like a joke? He's like, no, it's like metaphysics. I was like, no, that's not metaphysics. I was like, metaphysics is like understanding like that for a platform on two legs could be a chair. And if you take the parts away, what are the parts then? And like understanding the way that like the interplay of those things and how they like actually manifest in the physical environment, like and different properties. Like that has nothing to do with what we were talking about. Uniquely the jiu-jitsu community, like the football community, everybody knows that we're all stupid, right? Like, just like
they're in
we're
their
just hanging
lane.
out, like everybody's like, dude, we're just gonna talk about video games and like girls and shit, But like, I don't know, so for like video, when it comes to jiu-jitsu, people are like, oh, dude, did you see where like there might be? I'm like, just stop. You're high, and you're like every other high person. Like it's not metaphysics. Anyway, I'll stop talking.
You're the only one who thinks you're deep right now, dude. Sorry.
Everybody else is weirded out.
You have to be high. You have to be high to think that's profound.
Right. I was like, you don't say metaphysics. I was like, don't say metaphysics. We were talking about, I wish I could remember what it was, but it had nothing to do with actual metaphysics. And I was just like, dude, I can't right now. Like, can we just start rolling or something? Because like this is gonna piss me off. But yeah, I can see where you'd say that. Like when you said that the jiu-jitsu community is like a kind of the like pseudo cerebral community, and I get where it comes from because it's it's a super. You have to think a lot about movement, and you have to be very intuitive with your movement, and I guess it maybe lend itself to people thinking a little bit deeper about life in general. But I don't know, dude. They're just so cringy. It's cringy to use it.
No, I just think it's marketed at like white collar office workers.
Oh, actually, that's probably a better explanation. Yeah.
They're all chronically nidwit. They think they're smarter than they are. So that's
I was being a little too charitable.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I was being
just
too
kidding,
charitable.
dude. No, I'm gonna get beat up. Guys, I'm not trying to fight you. I'm just being funny, but also stop being stupid. You're not that smart. Shut up. Yeah.
Yeah, none of us are that smart.
A question, I got off on a tangent there. Like that I've been thinking about that a lot lately because it didn't set with me right. Like I already knew like you can't get somebody to be good at a movement by like instructing them to do it and repeat it. But that's not the only thing. It's also just simply not the case. There's 20 elite level passing styles, and some of them are very obviously require more movement. They require more quick athleticism and adaptability. And it's like, if efficiency is what is required to be elite, why are there so many different functional working, elite level guard passes. Like what, like it just, the more you think about what people say, the less it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially in something as highly variable as grappling. I mean, just
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people, I think, are just paying lip service to like the newest idea they heard. It's it's just kind of what it ends up being. They heard John Danaher say something, and they're going to say it, and then they'll say it like so at the end of it, and then they'll think they're cool or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. They light up candles and start singing their alms. Put
Right.
a little shrine in the corner of the room with Elio Gracie picture. And Danaher next to it, like a little small picture next to him.
Yeah. Yeah. You ever watch Hey Arnold?
And light. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. With the Hey Arnold
Yeah,
shrine in Helga's closet.
Oh yeah. Yes, exactly that.
That's what it is.
A little, yep, the little shrine in the corner with the incense and everything. Yep, that's exactly Danaher to most of his fans.
Yeah, they go there.
Wow, this guy is deep. Hey, you didn't graduate with his PhD, right? He didn't finish.
Yeah, I mean he's got a lot of knowledge and he delivers it well. But from a theoretical standpoint,
he is smart. He just didn't.
It's okay that some of the you could be super intelligent and not educated. I mean that's just. I think he probably falls in the intelligent.
I mean, he is educated, to be fair. He got all the way to a doctorate program, but it is funny that people will bring that up. He's like, yeah, he was in a doctorate program. It's like,
what was it in though? I can't remember.
He didn't finish though. I think it was philosophy.
Oh, nice. That explains his vocabulary. I mean, he's got, like I said, he's great to listen to for like knowledge and like I think. What does Greg say about him? He's a good like knowledge teller or something like that. That's what he says. Yeah. Teller. So I totally agree with that.
Well, what he does is really useful. It's more useful for coaches, in my opinion. What he does is really useful.
It's like heuristics and stuff. Yeah.
For just understanding how grappling works.
Right.
Like at a mechanical level. But if you think you're going to take understanding how it works at a mechanical level and then just like put yourself on sort of script to reproduce the optimal mechanics, it's just not going to work that way.
Yeah.
It's not how it works.
Yeah. When I started jiu-jitsu, man, I started to listen to, I listened to a lot of Danaher just because like I wanted to consume as much information as possible about it. And I was drawn to him because he was a little bit more cerebral in the way that he spoke. So, but yeah, like that doesn't translate to human behavior necessarily. So, there's a limit to that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So how do you, circling back to the knee injury thing, how would you go about preventing knee injuries? What are, I guess that has a lot of dimensions to it. So like from what you do as a,
it has two main dimensions, and it comes down to your ability to produce force or strength and mobility, your ability for your joints to kind of move in certain directions under load, right? If you could produce force in the closed chain, meaning that your foot is planted on the ground and you're able to do a lot of things from a lot of different angles and produce force that way. And also produce force in the open chain, where an example of that would be in the guard, and someone's trying to pass, you'd be able to produce force through your knee and your tibia and your femur in different angles. If your knee is resilient in that way, then your risk for injury goes down. So you're able to go through a full depth squat. You're able to do sit on your knees and kind of lean all the way back without your knees cut. It's called a reverse Nordic curl. If you could do something like a curtsy lunge where there's a heavy like external rotation torque on your knee, all of those things are going to prevent your injury, or prevent, theoretically, that they're going to help prevent injury more than just doing jujitsu alone. Because there are movements that are done more often, or that the body requires more often in a jiu-jitsu environment or a grappling environment than others. So making sure that you have a full, I would say the biggest two things that you could do is make sure that you can move through full ranges of joint motion under load, and then progressively load those over time. That is probably the best way that you could prevent, I hate saying prevent injury, but reduce the risk for injury as much as you possibly can. So, and resistance training is undoubtedly the best way to do that. So now your tendon adaptation and your like cartilage adaptations, like your meniscus, are going to come through doing the specific movement, right? So your LCL is not going to become a little bit more resilient from doing a squat, but it will if you do a bunch of triangles, right? Because it's tensioning and it's releasing, it's tensioning and releasing, it's tension, and so it becomes tighter over, or it becomes more resilient over time to this, as long as you don't overload it and it tears, which is, I think I don't think this is pretty well understood. When knee ligament injuries happen, it's because they are not as nociceptively innervated. Right? So it takes the if you stretch out your muscle or like the musculotendinous junction enough, like you get pain in a very, like it kind of ramps up nice and slow, and you're like, okay, tap. But when it comes to like the cruciate ligaments in the knee, this is why heel hooks are so dangerous, right? So you don't think anything's happening, all of a sudden, and you're like, oh shit, that hurt. Like the pain happens at the level of the injury, not before it. So there's no awareness that something bad is about to happen. Well, there's a little awareness. So that your ligamentous resilience is going to be is developed over long periods of time, being that they're avascular structures, or largely avascular structures, over time with your sport. But the best thing that you can do for your muscles, your tendons, and your cartilage is to move around weight and progressively load those weights over time. Yeah, that would be my answer.
Awesome. Yeah. And then the other half of that is just practice with variability.
Yeah. Variability. That's it. I mean, and again, depending on how how deep you want to go into the analysis, right? You talked about, it's pretty obvious what the difference between a squat and a lunge is, right? Well, what if I do a squat and then I take my left foot and I move it 2 inches forward, and then I do the same movement? Is that a lunge?
It's in the genre of
or is it a
lunge,
squat, right? So you
but
could
it's working the muscles differently.
Yeah, so you can move, but is it a lunge or is it a single leg squat? Like, so I mean, there's all kinds of like different the way that you analyze movement, and the way that you and the way that that's expressed through language is a whole nother topic. But like,
that's a taxonomy issue,
right? Yeah, exactly. So it's just a variety of movement. However, you can't expect an adaptation to occur unless you repeat that movement, or repeat the movement required to achieve that adaptation, and progressively load it over time. For example, if you want your knees to be stronger and you can perform a squat, you should, I'm not saying that you can't do like lunges and other things, but if you want your squat to get better, you need to progressively load your squat and track how much you're progressively loading your squat. That is an adaptation that you will receive. After that, we call it a mesocycle, right? Are you familiar with like macro and mesocycles when it comes to like programming?
Periodization and all that? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So let's say you've got you're going to go through a 12-week program. In the first 6 weeks, you want to train your squat. It's more beneficial to train your squat for 6 weeks if you want your quads to get stronger than it is to train the quad or train the squat for 2 weeks and then do leg extension for 2 weeks and then do lunges for 2 weeks. Your body is going to specifically adapt to the demand that you put on it. So yes, variety is important, but you have to do certain movements long enough based off of your understanding of their tissue healing to get an adaptation that you want, and then do your best to maintain it while you work on something else. So that's the only thing I would add there.
Great. So repetition is important.
It is to a
repetition
degree.
without repetition.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if you look at, like, I could take I could do a rep with my eyes closed, and it's not the same repetition. Or
No,
I could blink at a different point on my descent of the squat, and it's a different repetition. So, but you're right. Different.
Well, the blinking one, that's a little bit pedantic. But if you do it with your eyes closed, you're using a different information source to control your movement, which is like entirely your proprioception or
So
whatever your kinesthesia, whatever your internal sense is.
Yeah, so there's three things that kind of tell you where you are in space: your vestibular system, your visual system, and your sense of touch. Right. So if you take away the visual system out, your vestibular system necessarily has to work harder to keep you upright because you're already in contact with the ground. So yeah, the only thing I was saying there is like change one thing, and it's not a repetition, but repetition is important until it's not. I'll say that. It's more important for like specific like physiological adaptations than it is for skill acquisition. I'll say that.
Yeah, in skill acquisition, it becomes repetition. It becomes repeat exposure to a problem and not repeat exposure to a specific movement or solution.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Because the adaptation is primarily perceptual in nature.
Right.
There is a conditioning effect, but it's too variable to be like, hey, I'm going to grow my biceps by just doing smash body lock passes or something like absurd like that.
Yeah,
like you can't.
That is not.
You can't
I
do
can
hypertrophy.
say for a fact that is not the most efficient way to grow your biceps. Maybe not 100% fact because, but we have a lot of literature on hypertrophy.
Yeah, it's fairly well understood. YouTube will make you feel like it's not, but it is pretty well understood. Cool, man. Well, is there anything I didn't ask you about that you were raring to talk about or wanted to?
No, I was just,
artists?
I was just coming on to make sure I thoroughly answered all your questions, man. This is good. I don't know of any. We talked about injury. We talked about PT's role in combat sports. A good physical therapist role in combat sports. Physical therapy at large. I think we covered a lot. Little tangents, but that always happens.
Yeah. Just trying to, getting my shots in on the grappling community.
They
continually confound me with their questions that they believe are profound.
I watched the.
I don't hate him, and I don't hate Danner either. I mostly don't like his fans. Not
me
him.
Either. Me either. I don't hate anybody we talked about. I just sometimes whenever when you said the jujitsu guys were like fake cerebral, I was like, dude, I have like totally noticed that too. But I wanted to bring up. I watched remember you said that you were going to like an ecological flavored jujitsu kind of seminar. So they put that the standard jujitsu put it up on his YouTube, and I watched it. It was really good. The thing that struck me the most was this one guy that said, you're using words like invariance. Have you found that that when people don't know it's like, I didn't know what you were talking about, and it kind of turned me off for it a little bit. Have you found other languages that work better? And he was like, it's exactly how I would have answered the question. He was like, no, that's just a failure to engage with the information. He's like, I didn't know any of that. And they're like, he's like, but I'm not a scientist. You're using these scientifics. He's like, I'm not a scientist either. Like, I read the white papers and I had to go figure it out. He's like, that's a motivation issue. He's like, that's a failure on your part to try and learn, and that was my favorite part of that entire thing. Even the stuff that happened after that, because that was relatively early on. But I thought that was awesome. Yeah. And then you said something afterwards. Yeah, I can't remember exactly what you said, but you said something that was
I forgot I'm in that recording. Yeah.
You because he was like, Josh is here to keep me in check. But you said something to that guy, and I was like, yeah, that's right. And hopefully it cleared it up for him and he didn't talk again the rest of the rest of the thing. But I can't remember what you said. But it made a lot of sense, and I think it clicked with him the way that you said it.
Yeah, Greg talked to, I think I know the specific guy. They ended up talking a lot afterwards and cleared up some static, and that one turned out well. There's some other people there I think that didn't. One of them I don't even think came back, but
Really?
that stuff I don't think is on recording. But yeah, just like some sideways.
That's incredible. See, like, why would you go to that seminar? I guess the reason to go to the seminar would be to try to like agitate.
Question.
You know, maybe like the sole purpose was to be like, I'm going to show Greg Souders, you know.
Yeah, it was like one or two people. Everyone else was cool, but it was like one.
Oh, that's
one or
awesome.
two people. One in particular, I think, that didn't show up again for the next.
I mean, I even feel bad about like the way that during my interview with him, I rewatched it. I got some comments on the video. Like I interrupted him way too much, and that was just kind of me being nervous about like him and like me doing my first interview. And so, Greg, if you're watching this, I apologize. But like, I was even like upset with myself about that. I could not imagine like going to someone's seminar that they've been studying for a long time, right? And he's done a very good job of delivering this information as far as I'm concerned. And just to agitate, I don't know. I can't get in that mindset. I was like, when I heard that, I was like, man, what are you even doing there? Like, you're not gonna.
Yeah, it's what. Speaking of motivation, what motivates you to pay money?
Yeah,
to be at
what do you
seminar
like? What are you doing? What
make a couple of sideways comments?
Cool, like that you can barely hear in the background. So, I don't understand.
I don't know what the purpose is, but the conference was awesome. It went off without a hitch. 99.9% of everybody was cool. There's just like one or two people that had a couple of sideways comments, but yeah, it was yeah,
whatever.
It's wild. Like why do you pay money to be there to do something like that? But yeah, I did one 2 hours after that presentation. They're eventually gonna put that one up too, and then Egamels did one right after. So there was 3 presentations. All of them were long. They're like an hour and a half each.
So Standard's going to put those up too?
Eventually they're going to put. No, the ecological dynamics for submission grappling has been putting those up, and I think that Standard reposted the.
Okay, I'll have to check it out. Yeah. Because I follow Standard Jiu-Jitsu, and obviously I follow your YouTube page. I didn't know whoever's going to put that out. I don't know if I subscribe to their channel, so I'll need to see. What is it?
It's a new channel. It's brand new. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Ecological dynamics for submission grappling.
Okay. Let me just type it. Actually, just write it down.
Yeah.
Dynamics.
While you're doing that, where can listeners find you? Like, I know you have a YouTube channel. You do some great biomechanics
YouTube
analysis.
Channel. Yeah, so I do a lot of. Right now, I'm doing a series on the biomechanical analyses where I just take the last one I did was Alex Pereira. The last one the one before that was Ryan Garcia, and I break down a lot of the biomechanics in it of different movements. But the channel name is Combat Athlete Physio. You can find me at Combat Athlete Physio or at Combat Athlete Physio for my Instagram. I actually have a Reddit. It's called Combat Sport Injuries. Only a couple people have posted so far, but Reddit's kind of hard to get up and running. And then you can always email me if you have any issues at combatathletephysio@gmail.com. I will have a website within the next couple of months. I'm still putting that together, so I'm trying to figure out a best way to do that. But those are all the spots.
Yeah. Sweet. Well, thanks for coming on, man. We'll have to do it again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Before you go, can you do me a big favor? Positive reviews help the show get more listens. If you got value from this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And don't forget to check out combatlearning.com for more resources on skill acquisition and coaching. See you on the next episode. This episode was produced by Micah Peacock, including the intro and outro music.